Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for attending the Collaborative Mentoring webinar series. I think we need to just make sure we're all on mute before we start. And thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Thursday. Today we will be talking about supporting and inspiring Native youth and how to employ this strategy with our youth today. My name is Hannah Grantees, and I am with the Governor's Prevention Partnership. We are the Connecticut affiliate of Mentor, and I'm going to be facilitating today's conversation with some fantastic panelists. As we know, there's no one-size-fits-all model for working with or within American Indian Alaska Native communities. Instead, we invite you to engage in the reflection around how you can create the conditions needed to support and inspire youth through mentoring or other youth developmental programming. Creating conditions means examining your program structure, your communication strategies, and your personal biases to make sure you are not inadvertently oppressing systems. It's also important to understand that Native communities and the ways in which mentoring and other programming can support youth within these communities. So let's get started. This webinar is part of the Collaborative Mentoring webinar series, which is funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention through the National Mentoring Resource Center and facilitated in partnership with Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. These webinars would not be possible without the planning team, which includes the mentoring partnerships that will be on the next slide when it comes right up. You can see the collaborators to the Collaborative Mentoring webinar series. In addition to this series, the NMRC provides resources for mentoring practitioners. At the end of the webinar today, we will provide you some additional details on how you can access this free support. Next. So before we get started, I wanted to share some housekeeping information with you all. In 1 week, you'll receive an email with information about how to download a copy of these slides and view the webinar recording. You can also access this information directly by going to Mentor's website in the next week. As we are always trying to improve this series, we're looking for your input each and every time we host a webinar. A short survey will pop up as you exit this webinar. Please take 3 minutes or so to give us your feedback. All right, next slide. So we really want this to be an interactive and participatory experience. One back. So please use the question box to ask questions throughout the webinar. Elizabeth Santiago from Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership, will be queuing up our questions today to share with the panelists during the Q&A portion of the webinar. We may not be able to get to everybody's questions, as there are several hundred of you on today's call and the webinar, but we're going to do our best. The questions that we share with our panelists are generally ones that broaden or deepen the conversation. So first, to get a sense of who is with us today, we're going to have 2 short polls. The first poll is, what is your experience? Sorry. Maybe our polls are not working this afternoon. Ah, there we go, everybody. So our first poll is, what is your experience level in the mentoring field? Are you a beginner? Are you experienced? Or you are an expert? We'll give you a few seconds to do this one. Okay. There we are. Oh, wow. That's great. So definitely a need, for beginners on today's webinar. And then our experience, I welcome you to ask some great and in-depth conversations so that we can have a very rich conversation when we do the Q&A. And about 10% of us are experts. That's great. So our second poll is, what is your role in the mentoring field? Are you a practitioner, a researcher, a TA provider, a funder, or other? So we'll give you a few seconds to answer that. All right, let's see where we are, if everybody had a chance to enter their poll. That's great, practitioners. I can definitely tell you there's going to be some pieces that you're going to take away as soon as this webinar is done and start to implement them. Researchers, TA providers, it's great. And our others, oh, wow, almost 50% of our friends on this webinar are others. I can't wait to hear what questions they come up for. It'll be great. So thank you so much, everybody, for participating in our poll. And we welcome you, and we think that today's information will be really applicable to everybody that's on the webinar. So today on our webinar, we have 4 outstanding individuals to be a part of this. I think you're going to be really engaged in all of this. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce each of the panelists. But if at any time during today's webinar you have a question, feel free to use the Q&A panel that's on your right, and we'll have an opportunity to ask a few questions again at the end. So our first panelist today is Cortney Yarholar, and he is currently an enrolled member of the Sac and Fox Nation of Oklahoma. And next slide, so you can see what he looks like. In 2000, he attained his BA from the University of Oklahoma, majoring in Native American Studies. In 2006, he attained his master's in social work from Washington University in St. Louis. He works as the division lead of informed care and behavioral health initiatives with the OJJDP Tribal Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center. We are so happy to have him on today's web. He's actually going to kick us off after Mike speaks, but I'm going to tell you, you're going to love the information. As I mentioned, I think you're going to get some pieces you can take away automatically. So welcome, Cortney. Our next presenter is Dr. Crystal Aschenbrener, and she is the department chair of the new social work at Alverno College, where she helps to develop a variety of different pieces. She has been currently implementing a non-traditional mentoring intervention for 10 years. Please note, though, this is really exciting for us all to hear, that our college students are the mentors and the Native youth are the mentees. She began teaching here in 2017, and she teaches courses including social work, programs and policies, human behavior and the social environment, social work practice courses, and Native American service and research. Her primary goal is to ensure social work majors are successfully able to meet the social justice needs of the Milwaukee and surrounding area. She has been implementing, as I mentioned, this non-traditional mentoring intervention for 10 years. She was recently just invited to join the board of the National Mentoring Resource Center with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. Welcome, Crystal. Our next presenter is Christian Weaver.
Thanks, everyone. Glad to be here.
He serves as the love it. Our next presenter is Christian Weaver, and he currently serves as the Director of Organizational Development for the Native Service Division, Boys and Girls Club of America. He is also the founder and CEO of an outdoor apparel company. He has been in the development and strategy planning industry for over 14 years. Prior to joining the BGCA, he served as the manager of corporate and tribal relations for the American Indian College Fund. He also sits on the board of Natives in Philanthropy and the Denver Facility and Energy Efficiency Board. We are so excited to have Christian with us today, as well as our next panelist is Mentor's very own Michael Garringer. He serves as the Director of Research and Evaluation for Mentor, owning original research projects as well as those related to the translation of mentoring research into program practice. He has worked in the mentoring and education fields for over 17 years. He also leads data collection evaluation projects in an effort to highlight the prevalence and impact of mentoring across our country. Garringer has authored and edited many guidebooks and program tools to support youth mentoring, as well as one that we use every day in our field, The Elements of Effective Practice for Mentoring, the 4th edition, the newly released The Power of Relationship Study, and Examining Youth Mentoring Services Across America. Over his year, he has contributed to many leading research to practice events, such as the Summer Institute on Youth Mentoring, and the annual conference is hosted by many Mentors affiliates. Welcome, Mike. So we're going to turn it right over to Mike to kick us off.
Great. Thank you, Anna. I wanted to just kind of tee up our presenters in this topic today. This is one that we've been doing a lot of work on here at Mentor through our National Mentoring Resource Center project. And really wanted to just give a bit of background before I turn things over to Cortney. This is a topic that has been near and dear to the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention for many years, and I think for several decades now. They have funded an awful lot of work serving American Indian and Alaska Native communities. And you see here on the slide that they have established a tribal youth training and technical assistance center. Cortney's going to talk a lot about what those folks offer and how folks in our field can access what they offer. OJJDP has also funded tribal youth programs, coordinated tribal assistance solicitations, which allowed for kind of coordination across multiple agencies and services within tribal communities, and over the years has really dedicated a host of funds to different youth summits, mentoring specific programming, prevention work more generally in Native American communities. So this conversation today is part of a big body of work that's been going on for many years. But in 2017, OJJDP really asked this project to focus very specifically on the ability of mentoring relationships and mentoring programs to further support American Indian and Alaska Native youth. If we go to the next slide, you'll see kind of some of what we've been up to and some of what we'll be talking about here today. So Crystal has been working on a big kind of research and evidence review of mentoring for American Indian and Alaska Native youth. We're putting the finishing touches on that now, and that should be released in September at some point. We've also been working on an e-learning module called A Critical Orientation for Supporting and Inspiring Native Youth. This is being finished up maybe as soon as next week, and we're hoping to get it posted live to the NMRC website, and we'll be sending out an email to everyone who's attended today with a link to that when it's ready. And that's going to be a great kind of online training for mentors that are working directly with young people, but also for staff in programs as well. There will be ongoing collaboration between the NMRC and the Tribal Youth Training and TA Center, and that will kind of come out in the years to come. But certainly tribal entities and mentoring programs that are serving American Indian and Alaska Native youth are invited to apply for technical assistance as well. And so you can do that through the NMRC website. So I think I'm going to turn things over to Cortney here to talk a little bit about the work of their center and about the needs of Native American youth more broadly.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. And hello, everyone. Happy that you could join us this afternoon. And I want to first start by saying thank you to the staff at Mentor and all of the partners for the invite and for the invite for the TA Center here, the Tribal Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center. We are certainly just excited about the partnership that we have with Mentor and the future work that lies ahead. So that was what was stated before. OJJDP has poetry, and as a part of that, we were awarded the OJJDP Tribal Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center, and it's a cooperative agreement with the OJJDP. And I just wanted to take a brief moment to tell you a quick bit about who we are, where we're located, how you can access TA and get a hold of us. We are housed actually through the Indian Country Child Trauma Center on the campus of the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. That's where our central office is located. We also have remote offices around the country in Minneapolis, South Dakota, and Montana, as well as in California. And we try to keep a pulse of Indian country and what's going on. And so those remote offices really help us stay engaged at a local level. And we're just really happy to be in our third year providing services for training and technical assistance for OJJDP tribal grantees, as well as tribal communities that are doing work with juvenile justice in Indian country. So this here is a snapshot of what you're looking at, is a snapshot of our website, and the URL is tribalyouthprogram.org. So it's tribalyouthprogram.org. I just now realized I cut that part of the URL off of the snapshot, but I'll be happy to send that out. And you can go to our website and you can click the Make a Request button, and we'll get an email, and somebody will get back to you just as soon as possible within 12 hours or so. But that's a little bit about us. Again, we provide training and technical assistance to OJJDP funded grantees, as well as tribes and people doing work within Indian country regarding juvenile justice. So that encompasses prevention programming, strategic planning, as well as one of the OJJDP's funding that we provide support for are the healing to wellness programs. We can move over to the next slide. That would be great. So OJJDP is providing funds to empower youth through development and pro-social behaviors through intervention and diversion from the justice system. They're doing that through two programs that we particularly support. One is the tribal youth programs. The other one is the juvenile healing to wellness courts. And so to really kind of sum it up, I always say that the tribal youth programs are really geared towards preventing young people from going into the justice system. And then the juvenile healing to wellness courts are working with those young people that are already within the justice system and helping them get out of that system and integrate back into the community and be productive members of society. And so those are the two primary programs that we provide training and technical assistance to and across the country. Again, I think I mentioned that what we do as far as the TA is technical assistance. We help with strategic planning. We find that a lot of our grantees have really benefited from the community readiness assessment or the community readiness model, which really allows local level program planners to assess the readiness of their community and where they are to tackle an issue. And what this does is it helps them tailor their services and programs to meet the needs of where the community is. So those programs and efforts are more sustainable and community driven. And so we are a huge champion of, if you will, of the community readiness model. But again, that's just one tool that we use and we promote and we provide within our cadre of strategic planning. Again, we also do provide the strategic planning with an eye towards sustainability and integration of cultural elements. So I hesitate when I say the integration of culture or cultural integration, because it's really much more than that. When we're developing programs and initiatives, we're really thinking, how do we develop programs and initiatives from the ground up with the community input that is culturally, that are reflective of the cultural values, but also connected to where the community is, so that they'll have ownership of that initiative and move it forward. And so we try to think of all of these things and provide technical assistance to support our grantees when they're doing this kind of planning. So what I wanted to do today is provide a path, if you will, for working with our young people across Indian country. First of all, I want to say thank you for the work that you do, the interest that you have, and the passions that you're bringing to this work. Because those passions, your interests, and the efforts that you make are really welcomed by our communities, by our American community. And thank you for those efforts. Now, how do we engage young people? I thought it'd be best by lighting this path, by sharing what I've heard from young people, from youth, when talking with youth and visiting with youth. So what are the youth telling us? They say that any youth development or programming, it must be meaningful and purposeful. And by that, we dive a little bit deeper and they tell us that it must be youth-guided and youth-led. So many of you may have heard these terms before. If so, great. And if you're utilizing these principles, that's so awesome, and we thank you for that work. If it's new to you, welcome to this new language here, and we hope that I can share a little bit of light on something here. But youth guided, what does that mean? It means that youth are equal partners in creating systems change and policies and procedures at the individual, community, state, and national levels. We can go to the next slide, please. It's not just important. Youth-guided, youth-led is not just important because it's a good idea or that it's the right thing to do. It's important because it makes services work better. It makes services sustainable. It makes services reflective of the community and provides ownership and what we call buy-in. Research shows that when young people have a say in what they're doing, when they feel they are part of a team, that they're more likely to be interested in the plan, and they're more likely to achieve the goals set forth by the team. So again, when we talk about meaningful and purposeful engagement, I grew up in a time when youth programs were developed, programs and services were developed, and the youth received these services. But what we're trying to do with this new idea of youth-guided and youth-led is engaging the young people in developing those services, those supports, those strategies, gaining their ideas. So we partner with the youth. Through my work with the Children's Mental Health Initiative through SAMHSA and the Systems of Care, these principles were practiced. And there's a saying that came out of that work with SAMHSA and the Systems of Care and Circles of Care communities. And it was young people saying, nothing about us without us. And I love that saying because it captures so much. It allows the opportunity to create services in partnership with youth, with young people, because they have a perspective, they bring the lived experience that we as adults or researchers or practitioners may overlook. And so meaningfully engaging our young people it just takes our services to a whole nother level. As you see on our next slide, there's a lot of opportunities for youth-guided services. And there's opportunities at the individual level when you're working individually with a young person, as well as opportunities for engaging them in this larger community, state, or national levels. I'll just quickly cover these. At the individual level, youth are at the steering wheel in their own healing. So when we're working with our American Indian youth, we got to recognize that there is impacts of historical trauma, and those impacts resonate through generation to generation. However, we also got to recognize that there's resilience and strength that is carried and that is passed on and that our young people possess. And so we have to tap into that and help them and guide them as they begin to steer their own healing process. This is also a person-centered focus, focusing on the individual growth. So it's what we call person-centered. It's self-empowering is that it instills belonging. It helps an individual, a young person, recognize that, somebody doesn't have to just do things for me. I can do things for myself. I can make choices. I can provide good choices for myself and those I care about. And again, it instills a sense of belonging, something that is a value held deeply within traditional tribal cultures across the nation. Although all the tribal cultures are vastly different and have different perspectives, there are some values that we hold dear. And one of those is the sense of belonging and recognizing that everybody belongs in the family and the community, and everybody has a role. And so this really helps engage and instill that sense of belonging. Again, I want to mention that without going into it too much depth, it's trauma informed. So recognizing that there's a lot of principles that go along with being trauma informed, but when we work at the individual level and engage young people meaningfully and purposefully, it's also trauma informed. And when we do it in a trauma informed way, very carefully. The two main principles or points that I want to pull out that I always like to highlight when we talk about trauma informed care, because we can do training. However, trauma training, trauma-informed care, I want to point out two principles: a sense of safety and a sense of choice. Because when anybody experiences a trauma, those are the first two things that are taken away: their sense of safety and their opportunity for choice. And so as we're doing work, as long as we're instilling that sense of safety and those options, opportunities for choice, that trauma-informed care, that is going to empower and provide meaningful and purposeful engagement with our young people. And again, operating in this way is sustainable and it's culturally competent. So then we also transition these principles to this broader macro level work with the community, state, or national levels. So we can engage young people in changing policies and practices, developing programs, evaluating programs, implementing programs. I know it's sometimes it's difficult to think, oh, our young people that we're working with, there's no way that they could sit in an advisory board group meeting. With some guidance and nurturing and some care, you would be surprised at what our young people could contribute to. Okay, I'll move on because I know we're kicking on time here. But we know that services are youth-guided, and I also put youth-driven or youth-led. When the young people are knowledge of the services, they begin to research and they begin to ask questions. They begin to understand the process of the systems and the services. So when we work with the grantees that we're working with within the juvenile justice and the healing to wellness courts, a lot of times young people have a lot of fear because they're coming into a court or they're entering into a justice system and they don't know what's going to happen. And not only them, but maybe their caregivers, their family, their grandparents, whomever their caregivers are, they may not. And so this lack of knowledge can be very scary. So when a young person begins to ask and question, well, what are we doing here? What's the process? What's next? What do I need to do to improve this situation or to influence this process in a good way? Then we are beginning to promote this idea of youth-guided services. They learn how to self-advocate, eventually articulate experiences and what helps them and also what harms them. Again, that's where you start tapping into the lived experience of our young people. But you can read through the list and I'll be happy to answer any more questions. I know we're taking on time, so I wanted to talk specifically on this next slide about mentoring and protocols, working with youth in tribal communities. And I'm going to try to keep it very short, but I wanted to mention that within our tribal communities, mentoring has always been a practice. It's always been a practice within every tribal community you go to. Because culturally speaking, when you look at the songs, you look at the food, you look at the dances and the ceremonies, most of those, by and large, are not written down. However, they're passed on. And those songs are carried on, those stories, those origin stories, those stories of meaning that tell who people are, who we are as family or clanships or how we're connected. All of those are held within the songs, within the stories, within the practices. And those practices are held tightly and taught to the younger people, taught to the children, to the grandchildren, the nieces and nephews. That is a sense of mentoring that has been around since for time immemorial for our tribal communities. There's also protocols, family protocols and family structures that I encourage you to get to know. Each tribal community is going to be different. Some that are very culturally informed will understand this and be able to share. Maybe the family structure is different. Maybe the uncle is the one who provides knowledge to the niece and the nephew. Maybe the aunt is the one that provides this knowledge. Maybe the parents have a different role, or maybe the grandparents have a different role. When we can find out and ask questions of what those protocols, those family structures are, that'll help us figure out how we can engage these young people as well as the families in meaningful and purposeful ways. So again, there's always a protocol, especially when you're talking about tribal cultures, tribal practices, tribal ceremonies. There's a way to get involved. I have one analogy that I want to share before I move on because I know my time is ticking. I was told by one of my elders that there are 3 circles at any given tribal ceremony or practice. And as long as if you're in that middle circle, you're well taken care of. You're right where you belong. You're well taken care of. People are looking after you. You're learning. You're picking things up, and you're also giving back. You're well taken care of. Then there's the second level, the second circle, where people are sitting around. They're looking in, and they're wondering. They're contemplating. They're seeing what's going on, and they're wondering if that's for me. And then the third circle is where we find a lot of our young people and parents and caregivers today. They're totally separated from that inside circle, and they're lost. They're looking for something. So when we're developing program services, we're developing strategies to engage our young people and our families and our communities, we have to find out what are the protocols to bring them from that outside circle to that inside circle. Because I guarantee you, with every tribe and practice and ceremony, there is a proper protocol. So when we can take the time to understand and get to know and make meaningful connections in the community, our cultural advisors and elders can lead us in a really great direction. So, but with that, I wanted to share that and provide some encouragement with the work that you're doing within Indian country. I have a few resources that are going out with the slide deck. They're on the next slide. We can just skip over that one and go to, I have a slide here titled, Where Do We Go From Here? And I've already mentioned these things, but what we do is we recognize, yes, the impact of historical trauma. We also recognize the daily traumas that our young people might be going through, or families might be going through. And we do that to help them heal, tell their story so that they can have power over that trauma and not the trauma overpower them. However, we must also support our American Indian and Alaska Native young people in creating a new narrative for Indian country. That's the opportunity that we have before us when we work with young people. It's helping them and supporting them and create this new narrative. Our American Indian people can be cultural, they can attend ceremony, they can go to college, they can accomplish all kinds of things. And so it's really up to our young people to define who we are as Indian country today. But with that, I wanted to share that and hopefully provide some encouragement. Looking at the time, I'm going to back out and I'm going to pass it over to our next presenter. And I thank you very much for your time, and I'll be on. And if there's any questions, please ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cortney. That was fantastic. I know here where I am sitting, I'm taking notes, and the slide that you talk about, some additional pieces that we can go and find. I can't wait to spend some time after this webinar and kind of go there and dig through those. So I appreciate it. I think you definitely gave the foundation for where we can go next. So I am going to kick it right over to Crystal to talk about some additional pieces of research that are currently happening in the field. So Crystal.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to talk about a resource that we've been working on for the past 6 months or so. As a person on the research board for the National Mentor Resource Center, we do these program reviews on different or specialized populations. And currently we're working on one for Native American youth. And we've been working on this with the intent, the aim of this project is really to help support practitioners, providing evidence of what has been going on both in the United States as well as around the world. Particularly when I refer to around the world, talking about Canada and New Zealand, those have been places that there's been a great deal of research. Some common themes that we've definitely seen, and Cortney echoed in his presentation, was incorporating cultural strengths, values, and spirituality, making sure those are essential components when working with Native American youth. That was very clear in all of the research that we did secure. Forming partnerships with Native American communities, whether that's forming partnerships with families or the community as a whole. That could be forming partnerships with existing programs, boys and girls clubs, after-school programs, tribal schools, whatever that may look like. working within the systems that already are occurring has some value. Then with that, a great deal of the research really focused on advancing cultural identity. Having more pride in one's culture was very much viewed as a benefit. Also can see that as someone who has worked in the field as a social worker and as well as working on a mentorship program, definitely have seen that value ripple all the way to the community, that if the youth feels good about their identity, then that plays out in how they're doing in school, and then the school's doing better, and then the community's doing better as well. So I really like to emphasize when we focus on prevention, like mentorship is able to do, then it can have those ripple effects of affecting more than just that youth. Mentoring can look different for Native American youth, maybe than what we find with some other populations. Particularly, it's not as common to see that traditional one-on-one mentoring like we often think of with big brother, big sister. It can include more group-style mentorship. It could also include more families and communities into the movement of how the program is created, how it's implemented, how it's evaluated. And like I already said, forming it with an existing program has a great deal of value. Going with what's already been developed in the community, what's already had the trust of the community, what's already been working, and then just tweaking that to add the mentorship component. Mentorship is definitely one of those solutions that needs to be part of a bigger component, and that it often has that prevention piece. It can enhance and needs to be in partnership with some other solutions. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, oops. Can we go back one slide? Thank you. Okay, here we go. We have found that there is overall limited research on mentoring with Native American youth. We definitely need more research, and I would like to put a big plug in for that if you are working with Native American youth, that you consider publishing your work. That doesn't necessarily always mean that you have to do all of that, the research and the publications. So forming partnerships with others who are trained in those areas or have that availability might be a good avenue for people to consider. We're finding that some of the factors why there's lack of research, the population that we're referring to is a rather small population and is spread out, and so that's been one of the rationales. Because of intensive risks and historical trauma, sometimes it's restricted people from being open to having outsiders come in to do research and starting new programs, which then, of course, that goes with the factor of forming those partnerships and ensuring that what is being developed is culturally attuned and strengths-based. Some other trust factors, relationship developments have been concerns, and again, related to historical trauma. So it's important that program developers are very much aware of the social problems and the historical trauma. And on that same note, it's also very important for program developers to be very aware of the strengths and the traditions. Cortney echoed many of those things, many of the strengths of the Native American community. And so being well aware of those factors are also very essential in developing programs. Sometimes Native Americans are in rural communities, and so sometimes rural communities lack resources, could lack transportation, funding, and volunteers. Very important to be aware of what the strengths are. On that same note, sometimes those lack of resources is what also causes mentorships with this population to have to be more creative and also maybe will look different than the traditional style mentorship project. And so those are just some things to maybe consider as you move forward with your projects. Then also having the Native American culture incorporated. Sometimes this needs to be part of other systems or other supports. And so with that, then the research may be geared towards those other supports and not necessarily towards mentorship. And so sometimes then we struggled to find all the research that was out there related to this population, as well as if there was research related to Native American youth in urban areas. Often at those sites, those programs, there was larger numbers of other minority races, which then caused us to put them more in our background and not necessarily in the forefront of our research, just because we were really focusing on research that served a bulk of the Native American youth. Okay, next slide. Next, thank you. As far as applying this to the field, just to reflect on some of the other things I said and hopefully echo some of the things that Cortney said, identifying with what the social problems, risks, and challenges are as they relate to historical trauma, ensuring that we understand that those are real. Also fully understanding that the culture has many strengths and what that looks like for the particular group of people that that you're looking to work with. With that, mentorship has historically had some similar strengths as the cultural values of this population. Like Cortney said earlier, mentoring is a great fit and is something that the culture has been practicing historically. The research that we did find didn't always seem like it fully captured what was happening in the field. And so with that, we found a great deal of literature out there on programs. They just were talking about best practices from their experiences and maybe potentially didn't have the evidence-based research that we used as a criteria for our program review. So there is a great deal of sources out there, and hopefully our program review will be one of those sources. And so be mindful of that as we move forward with it. Hopefully you do find it's a strength for you. Definitely incorporating the culture, which is full of strengths, as this has been proven as an extra bonus for the youth, and again, a bonus for the entire culture. Being creative when working with this group of people in how you define mentors, utilizing the services and the supports within that community and the families and the elders and the supports for the youth that exist, which includes all those natural supports, bringing them into the equation to be very, very helpful. And then partnering with existing programs. And then we're all just having that focus on what does that look like for your particular backyard, how, what are some of the strengths and what are some of the factors you need to consider. So those are just some of the things to consider when developing a program or advancing your current program. This is just what some of the research showed for us. That is it. I will take some questions, or you could wait until the end and ask more questions at that point as well.
Great, thank you so much. I think we are going to pause and see if Elizabeth or the team have received any questions that we could ask.
Yes, hi Hannah, thanks so much. Actually, there are a couple questions. There's one for Cortney, and people are wondering if you could share maybe an example of a program that became more youth-led or youth-guided, anything that might be helpful in other programs thinking about how they might start something like that.
Excuse me, was that a youth-guided question?
Yes. People were interested in knowing a little bit more. Sure. Yeah, people were interested in knowing a little bit more about, how you might go about becoming more youth-led as a program.
Great. There is a on the slide deck that is that we have here, there is a link that I provided. It's the Thrive webinar, Creating Trauma-Informed Youth-Guided Systems of Care. And on this link, there is, I'll have to find the link and put it up. There's actually a like a questionnaire that you can take, and it provides program planners an opportunity to think about different aspects of their programs. You know, do we have this in place? Do we think about this? Do we work in this way? Do we ask our questions like this? And so it's really a good start in assessing your own where you are as an organization or as an individual in your actions in becoming youth-led and supporting youth-guided services. So I would suggest that link, and I can look for that, and I can pass it over to our person here, and maybe they can share it somehow, or we can email it out afterwards.
That sounds great. Yeah, we'll be sending up a follow-up email with this slide deck and any other resources. So thank you for that. And then we have one question for Crystal. Someone would like to know.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say you could always ask for additional technical assistance at our website, which is www.tribalyouthprogram.org.
Okay, perfect. And we'll also have that link on the slide deck, so folks don't have to remember it right now, but they can access it later. Okay, so we have one more question for Crystal. Someone wondered whether your team reviewed the work of Native American programs that have been funded by OJJDP in the past 15 to 20 years, and just wondered if that was incorporated in your literature review.
We looked at any literature that we could find through multiple search engines. I don't recall how they were funded. And our goal was to look at as much literature as possible, then with the criteria of making sure it was referring to its own research and not referencing other research. We did look at a couple of systematic reviews, and then we just expanded it to look at what Canada and New Zealand were doing as well. So as broadly as possible.
Crystal, does your review have a table at the end that breaks down the studies that you reviewed? I know some of our reviews include that.
Yes, that is an excellent point. There's a very solid table that provides a great deal of information at a glance. It will be an excellent resource for people to be able to reference.
Great, thank you. And yeah, and just so folks know, I mean, it's possible that some of the programs that wound up being part of that research review were actually getting OJJDP funds, but, you know, off the top of my head, I'm not sure whether they were or not. But if folks want to learn more about those programs, as Crystal just said, there's going to be a nice table that breaks down what exactly the program was, and my guess is most of these programs are getting funding from a variety of sources. So
I'll let you guys continue, and I'll keep questions coming.
Great, that's awesome. Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you. I'm looking forward to see what other questions come in our time together. So at this time, we are going to turn it over to Christian to talk a little bit more about the work of the Boys and Girls Club.
Christian, you might be on mute if you're talking.
Are you there? All right, maybe Christian got disconnected.
There I am.
Oh, perfect. There you go. We're waiting another second. Oh, glad you're here.
No, it was telling me that the organizer had me muted. So now I'm glad that I can speak. Hello, everybody. How are you?
Welcome.
My name is Christian Weaver, and thank you for the presenters that came before me. Quite insightful. I have the honor and privilege to work for Boys and Girls Clubs of America's Native Services Division. And we've been doing work in Indian country for over 25 years. The first Boys and Girls Club in Indian country was founded 25 years ago on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And since then, we have hundreds of Boys and Girls Clubs in Indian country that have been established all across the country, everywhere from Alaska down to Seminole, Florida. And so we're really blessed with all the work that we've been able to do over the last 25 years. And you know, mentoring is definitely a strong piece of the work that we do in our Boys and Girls Clubs. We've got 5 key elements that we always say that are essential to positive youth development within our Boys and Girls Clubs. A safe and positive environment is number 1. I know Cortney spoke to having that safety as a part of mentorship, and for us, a safe and positive environment is number 1. We also obviously encourage a fun time, but supportive relationships are a key element in our 5 key elements, and that directly ties into the mentoring that we do within our Boys and Girls Clubs. And within those supportive relationships, we make sure that we have opportunities and expectations, and also moments of recognition. And I think those are all key elements when it comes to mentoring within our Boys and Girls Clubs and within the Indian country as a whole. So that's a little bit about the work that we do. Boys and Girls Clubs are obviously they are brick and mortar facilities. Oftentimes they're after school programs, but they all look very different across the country. But essentially provide a lot of different types of programming, everything from STEM to healthy habits, healthy eating, drug and alcohol prevention, and mentoring. So I'm blessed to join Mike as we talk a little bit about the work that we're doing in mentoring, and what mentoring looks like in Indian country. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so I wanted to just kind of tee us up here a little bit. Basically, Christian and I wound up writing a section that's aimed at practitioners that's going to be accompanying the research review that Crystal and her colleagues did. And what we wanted to do, even though Crystal talked quite a bit about, you know, strategies for kind of developing and implementing programs, you know, I really wanted Christian's perspective on what do people working in the field take from this research, and what are the things that have worked at Boys and Girls Clubs around the country? You already mentioned a couple of them in terms of making sure that they're fun and kind of culturally attuned. So what folks will find in the section that Chris and I wrote are practices both for approaching a tribal community initially to kind of start up a program, but also for existing programs, you know, even outside of tribal communities that just happen to have a decent number of, you know, tribal youth in their program, right? So we kind of tried to look at it from a holistic point of view, both programs in tribal communities and programs more broadly. And we looked at 2 different levels. One is around program leadership and kind of initial program design, and then really what do volunteer mentors need to know when they're working with American Indian or Alaska Native youth, with a real emphasis, as I said, on that cultural attunement. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Christian here to talk a little bit about some of these recommendations, and obviously based on a lot of their work at Boys and Girls Club over the years, about how do you initially kind of approach a community and start thinking about implementing a program?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mike. So a couple of things, and I think Cortney kind of brought this up a little bit, but it's important to recognize and respect that each Native community is unique. For instance, I'm from a small tribal community located in Long Island, New York, and we're a coastal community, and have close relationships with other tribes in that area. But our way of thinking and our way of praying and living is not necessarily the same as other communities across the country, right? And in that respect, mentoring might look different within our community than it might look in other communities. Where in our community, we might have relationships with maybe grandmothers as key mentors, or grandfathers as key mentors. In other communities, that mentorship might fall upon an aunt or an uncle. So I think that as we're developing these mentoring programs in different communities, and as I mentioned, Boys and Girls Clubs has a pretty diverse portfolio of clubs in different indigenous communities. I think it's beneficial and thoughtful to make sure that we're recognizing the uniqueness of each community, and to be aware of those relationships and what mentoring looks like historically and currently within those communities. The next bullet point here says we recognize the challenges that rural isolation can also bring in choosing partnerships accordingly. We have quite a few Boys and Girls Clubs that are in very rural areas. I was just in Kansas the last 2 days, and out in White Cloud, Kansas, which is home to the Iowa tribe of Kansas and Nebraska. And I tell you, man, you don't really get much rural than that. There aren't any stores, and so the Boys and Girls Club is pretty much it as it pertains to child serving facilities. And so as I'm working with that Boys and Girls Club and working with them and developing their programming and their structure, we have to be very creative and say, we might not have the resources, whether those be financial resources or personnel resources, staffing resources that a major metro club might have. But we still do have, community resources, and we can draw on those. And for instance, the Prairie Band of Potawatomi, which is also in Kansas, they have a cultural room where elders in the community, primarily elder women, will come in a couple of times a week and work with the youth in developing their regalia for the year. And it's actually a pretty amazing room. They have lots of different arts and crafts in that room, and the women come in very nonchalantly and just sit and work with the youth and show them how to bead and do applique and other things. And it's not advertised as mentoring, but we all know that it's very much so is a mentoring program. And those are ways that we can get creative and structure mentoring in those facilities that are a little bit more rural and isolated. Next slide, please. Thank you. So some recommendations for program planning and implementation. So the first bullet says community leadership, understanding, and buy-in is critical to success. So we, as Boys and Girls Clubs and with other organizations, is imperative that we have the buy-in from the community of what we're doing before we go in and do anything, right? Because we want to do something in a good way. We want to have the blessing of the community. Before we charter Boys and Girls Clubs in Native communities, we have to have the buy-in of the community. This speaks very personally for me. We are working on chartering a Boys and Girls Club on our tribal territory, our reservation of Shinnecock, and we want the buy-in and need the buy-in of the community before we go in and do that, right? We want to know, hey, is this something that the community wants? And if you do want this, what are the best practices for us to work with the youth in the community? So literally, we sent out a tribal survey of a variety of different issues, but one of the issues was, do we want a Boys and Girls Club up at Shinnecock? And it's not until we get a positive feedback from the community that we'll go in and say, okay, this is what the community wants and needs. Let's work to establish that. So respect the sovereignty of the tribal government, is important, and establishing that relationship. And we'll find that that relationship will be most healthy when we have the support and buy-in from both the tribal government and the community members as a whole. And as we're establishing different programs within Native communities, it's also important to be astute about the community's traditions and culture and relationships that they currently have, right? We want to be pompous and act like we are the saviors of communities and going in and saying, you know, this is what we're going to do for you. We find it much more beneficial in saying, hey, what are the needs of your community? And what are some ways that we can help? And also learning about the relationships within the community, things that are respectful and things that are seen as disrespectful in the community. That way, that when we're going into communities, we're doing good work and we're doing it in a good way. Next slide, please.
Great, thank you, Christian. I think the other kind of set of recommendations that we wound up making kind of once you've made that initial approach to community and kind of have that buy-in and you're up and running, you know, what is it that mentors really need to know? And staff also, I mean, in many programs, you know, staff are also filling a mentoring role, even if it's kind of an informal one. And so we wound up talking a lot in this review about kind of what are the practices that need to happen at that relationship level. And one of the things that we really wanted to emphasize was creating a safe space within the program and within that relationship for the young person to just kind of be and be understood without judgment. And really making sure that mentors, especially if they're from outside that tribal community, are able to work with that young person without judgment and without inadvertently, I mean, even without even knowing they're doing it, kind of saying or doing things that disrespect the community's values. So, you know, obviously a lot of this can be mitigated by training, help mentors know when they might be, you know, stepping in it a little bit or saying something that, you know, might just reflect negatively on how they're viewing the young person or their community. Christian, you want to talk just briefly about kind of how you train staff and mentors at your clubs around the country to kind of create that safe space within the relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And so, as I pointed out, you know, if mentors and program folks are coming from outside the community, they might not be aware of all the issues and idiosyncrasies that are occurring within the community. And it's important to be sensitive to those things and to approach those without judgment. And so we offer a myriad of trainings throughout the year for club staff to go to so that they are aware of, hey, these are some things that go on within these communities that maybe we didn't experience in our lives. For instance, I mean, I personally did not grow up in on our reservation like my cousins did, and so my way of life and my experiences are different than a lot of my cousins. And so, you know, it's important for me that when I do work in our tribal community, that I'm going with an open heart of mind and not with the preconceived notion of life should be, right? Or because of what my life has been is what the life should be for other people. And I think that's an important lesson to take as we're going into different areas, whether you're going into a rural tribal community or even an urban tribal community. It's important to be cognizant that someone else's journey in life is always reflective or does not always look like what your journey in life has been. And in order to gain that trust for these young people, we let them know that we're here to meet them wherever they are in life, and create that safe space, not just emotionally, but also mentally, right? And to know that, hey, it's okay that you had a rough life, or it's okay that your household situation might look like mine, and we're all different. We can all come together and bond together and build these relationships together. I think, yeah, so I'll do
Great.
that. We can go to
Thank
the
you.
next slide.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. And I want to wrap up here a little bit in about 5 minutes so that we've got some time for some more questions. But we did want to talk about some of these other strategies at the mentor level. I think one of the things we talk about is getting to know the specific challenges of each mentee, the strengths they bring to the relationship, and also recognizing the intersectionality, and that yes, I may be a young person from a tribal community, but I also might have many other roles and identities that are part of who I am, right? And that, mentors need to not just think in kind of a cookie cutter mentality when they're working with young people. We also talk about, the role that elders can play in kind of co-mentoring, right? So I may have a mentor from outside the community whose role it is to expose me to new or different things or help me figure out a path forward. I can still be leaning on elders and kind of doing that in collaboration with other caring adults in the community. That kind of intersection between honoring tribal traditions and ways of knowing, but also exposing young people to new things, and integrating their culture into mentoring activities is a tricky balance. And Christian, when we were putting this together, you had a couple of really good examples of ways, simple ways, in which, even activities that were seemingly unrelated to tribalness as in and of itself could still incorporate kind of indigenous culture. You want to maybe give a couple examples of a way a mentor could weave that in?
Yeah, to be quite honest, I really don't remember the examples that I gave when we first talked, but there's a plethora of them, so I'll just, give some things that come to mind now. In our community of Shinnecock and other communities, I know that sports is a big thing, right? And we might not think of sports as really a traditional way of life, but for many of us, it's a great way for mentorship. And it's a great way that our youth look up to other peoples in the community for mentorship. I know that sometimes when we have, whether it's a Schimmel sister or maybe a Chris Wondolowski, who's a native soccer player, come to our communities, man, the outpouring of love for these people is immense, right? And that is, and them just showing up and showing love is true mentorship. And saying, hey, you can excel in anything in life, and if your passion is sports, if your passion is basketball or soccer or lacrosse, that's a great way to gain that mentorship. We do a canoe race every year during our powwow, which is Labor Day weekend, and I tell you what, the young people gravitate to the old people, to the older people. And oftentimes, young people are timid about getting in that water and paddling out into the bay. But once they see grandmas do it, literally grandmas hopping in those canoes and paddling out, those young people are facing their fears and they're getting in those canoes and they're going out as well. And then when everybody comes back to shore, the discussions are there about the journeys and about the experiences. And those are really amazing, truly amazing moments. I wish you guys could all experience that. But that happens across the country, right? The Pacific Northwest does their canoe journeys every year, and that brings out a lot of young people that are inspired by the older generations. I myself have the blessing of traveling to in all sorts of reservations all across the country, and even myself as an adult, I have lots of grandmoms and grandfathers all around Indian country, people who literally call me grandson, who aren't my grandmothers biologically, but are mentors to me. And I think those relationships are what help keeps our communities thriving and resilient. I think that Cortney spoke earlier to historical trauma in Indian country, but although we've had this historical trauma, we are still here. And we're still here because of these relationships that we have with the members of our communities, right? There are certain things that we have not given up and that we hold true, whether they're the relationships between our elders, our brothers and sisters, or even doing things like keeping lacrosse alive, our creators games alive, and seeing that in that type of mentorship within our sports and communities, I think really helps us strengthen and has allowed us to be resilient and still exist in the face of attempted genocide. And so to Mike's point, I think that mentorship can doesn't always have to look like a one-on-one relationship, right? It has many different faces in the Indian country, and can be very effective. Next slide, please.
Great, thank you. That was great examples and a couple of great visual images in my head. I'm picturing those canoes and got to get my grandma out in a canoe at some point, I think. The other thing that we talked about is this tension between exposing young people to new experiences, while once again, to the point you just made, still honoring that history and that culture, and just recognizing that that can be a fine line to walk for mentors, and one that they can inadvertently cross over. You know, a lot of mentors like to lavish special events and occasions on their young people, and that's, you know, sometimes fine, but you know, it's got to be done in a way that doesn't make it seem like your goal as a mentor is to take this young person from this community and take them to some place that you think is better, right? And doing that in ways that are respectful and, you know, exposing them to new things, but also honoring kind of who they are and their context is critical. And I think, you know, just ending with the notion that, you know, mentoring, the way it's employed in the U.S. is very much, like many things in our society, incredibly individualistic. It's one mentor guiding one youth, right? Just the two of us. But I think when working with tribal youth and communities, that's got to be tempered with the notion that in those places, the we is extremely important, much more important than the me. And I think tweaking mentoring and our concepts of it when we work with Native youth is absolutely critical. I want to take just 1 minute and kind of walk people through the tool that I think will help mentors do that very well. I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, a critical orientation for supporting and inspiring Native youth. We hope to have this up on the NMRC website early September at the latest, maybe as soon as the end of next week, depending on if we can get some technology things figured out with it, but it's coming together very nicely. It should be great for staff, both formal and informal mentors, and particularly schools that are interested in integrating mentoring into what they're providing their Native students. Just real quickly, the learning objectives for this, it's kind of broken into 4 sections. So up front, there's a lot of teaching about the landscape of communities, a lot of the historical trauma and other issues that we've talked about on this call today. Recognizing the strengths and complexities of Native youth identity, so that kind of intersectionality piece, identifying challenges and barriers that the young people you will be mentoring are facing and what you can do about that as a mentor. And then certainly, you know, opportunities to kind of support and celebrate that Native American identity and a variety of excellent strategies and kind of hands-on activities the mentors can do with young people. So we're very excited for this tool to come out, and once again, we'll be emailing a link to everyone when it's ready. So Hannah, I know we're a little bit pressed on time. Maybe we got time for a question or two if folks want to stick around for a few more minutes.
I think we're going to wrap up. I think that we've had some really great dialogue, and we were actually, I know I'm thinking here in Connecticut, right? We could have done this webinar for 2 hours. I think we need a part 2. So I think that would be an excellent, you know, kind of follow-up for the Collaborative Mentoring webinar series to host a part 2. So with that, I'm going to go 2 slides and just remind everybody, you know, for some additional resources. As we mentioned earlier, of course, we will ensure that everybody gets the materials, but, you know, Mentor really is involved in impacting by developing and supporting our national network of affiliates. Our affiliates provide the leadership and the infrastructure necessary to support the expansion of quality mentoring relationships in our local communities. So if you are on this webinar and you're not sure who your local affiliate is, please, click on that website and, go hunting to see who your affiliate is. Additionally, we encourage you to register your program with the Mentoring Connector, the national database of mentoring programs. This is actually a zip code searchable database, which allows mentors and mentees from across the country to find your program, and it's connected to such organizations as LinkedIn, the MBA Cares, Mentor.gov, and it really is a great way to promote your agency. But finally, of course, don't forget to check out the OJJDP National Mentoring Resource Center website for additional no-cost mentoring resources to help you apply these evidence-based mentoring practices to your program. The OJJDP NMRC provides evidence reviews, as we just heard today, on mentoring models and mentoring for special populations, as we've talked about today, how to implement some of those resources, and they're all reviewed by the NMRC Research Board, and as we mentioned earlier, Crystal is a new member of that. So you have the opportunity to request no-cost training or TA through there. So just a last reminder that 1 week from today, all attendees who registered for today's webinar will receive an email that with the link to the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series webpage, where we can post the recording, the slides, and the additional resources. So I know we may have gone quickly through some of them, but you will have an opportunity within a week to get those pieces. And as I mentioned before at the beginning, we don't want to forget your feedback. So at the end of today's webinar, please answer a really short survey that will help us make the series even better for future series to come. So next slide. If you have not had an opportunity, I encourage you to visit the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series page on Mentor's website. This webinar, as well as all of the archived ones, are up there, and some information about upcoming webinars. But mark your calendars, because the next webinar is Thursday, September 20th, so next slide. And it's perfect because we will all be back in school, all of us across the country at that time. So there will be a great webinar regarding school integrated mentoring. So please mark your calendars now, and as soon as that information comes up, please register. But just a big thank you to Mike, to Crystal, to Courtney, to Christian, to Elizabeth, to Shailana, everybody who made today's webinar possible. I'm looking forward to part 2. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy your Thursday.